Hello, Torvald here, and I've got another great weapons lesson for you. Taking another section from my Great Weapons 101 class. This lesson in particular is starting from the premise that whoever is watching this has no experience whatsoever in fighting with great weapons, and or may not have a whole lot of experience fighting in the SCA at all. So what we're going to be talking about here is stance, balance, guard, and grip when it comes to your great weapons. Now for the most part, when it comes to grip, the vast majority of your great weapons are hafted weapons, like my great axe here, or my cutting spear here, or glaive, or halberd. All of those are weapons with a haft and then a head with a limited striking area. So you generally have virtually unlimited grip area, but a limited striking head. However, one of the other types of great weapons, bastard sword or great sword, you have just the opposite. You have a limited grip area and basically an unlimited striking area. So that's going to change things up a little bit, but we're going to get to that in just a minute. So we're going to start from the most basic of locations for doing great weapons, and that is stance and balance. All right. So to start with, when it comes to stance, if you've had absolutely no training whatsoever in any kind of martial art, this is going to be the foundation of everything you do from here. I talked in one of my previous lessons about your vertical axis and your horizontal axis. And basically what we're doing is we're looking for your center of gravity, and we want to try and make sure that when you are fighting that you have a solid foundation from which to move and act. So to start with, you want to try and in your stance maintain your center of gravity straight up and down and horizontally across both of those axes. So to start with, there's my opponent. So for stance, you're going to have your feet shoulder width apart, right? And now remember, that's my opponent over there, not in front of me. I am not going to square up to my opponent. What I'm going to do from this position now is I'm going to turn just about a quarter to face my opponent. Your leading foot is not going to be pointing straight at your opponent. It's going to be pointing off to their right, your left a little bit. Your back foot is going to stay pointing this direction here. That gives you kind of a stable position there. And now you're going to bend your knees slightly. Now I started off with my feet just shoulder width apart, and this stance is pretty much how you would start fighting if you're using sword and shield in either Oldcastle or Bellatrix forms. When you're doing great weapons, it really doesn't change a whole lot, except that you might want to give yourself about another half step. Not a lot, just about another half step. Okay? So from this position, with your knees set, your feet set apart like that, bend your knees. You've got yourself straight up and down this way. You've got straight back and forth. You've got straight forward back. You do not want to be leaning back. You do not want to be leaning forward. You don't want to be leaning here or here either, because you want to be able to move in any direction, forward, back, side, side, without having to shift your gravity. So if you're already in this position here, you can move however you need to without having to reshift your gravity, right? If you've allowed yourself to be back, if I'm facing my opponent here and I'm already leaning back here and I want to move that direction, I have to completely reshift my weight and get moving in that direction. So there's going to be a moment of hesitation as you're moving from one to the other. And as we all know, in this type of fighting, a split second can be the difference between a successful defense or a successful offense. So you want to keep your center of gravity straight up and down on all your axes so you can move in whatever direction you need to, whether you're going to use it for an offense or whether you're going to use it for a defense. Okay, so there's your basic stance. All right. Now I know that there are some people that teach a different form for great weapons, and they actually do tend to square up to their opponent depending on the weapon they're using. I typically don't. I want to make it clear, I said this before, I am not a believer in the one true way of doing anything. I'm showing you my way. Right? If there is something that I'm showing you that works for you, go ahead and use it. If there's something that doesn't work for you, go ahead and discard it. There is no cookie cutter approach to any of this type of fighting. Whether it's with great weapons or sword and shield, doesn't matter. Right? I'm showing you my way. Again, use whatever works for you, discard anything that doesn't. Okay, so we've got our foundation now. We've got our stance, we've got our balance. Now let's talk about grip. When I'm fighting with a great weapon, I'm right-handed, but I fight with a left-handed grip. That means that my left hand is trailing, my right hand is forward, and the weapon is to the left side of my body. Now, why is the weapon to the left side of my body as opposed to this if I'm right-handed? Well, first of all, the majority of your opponents are right-handed. The majority of their attacks are going to be coming to the left side of your body. I want the weapon on my left side because it's already in a position now to block with very little adjustment. If I want to block a leg shot, I really don't have to do a whole lot, do I? It's just a matter of getting the weapon into a block position. If I'm already out here, I can knock the opponent's weapon down. The weapon is on my blocking side to begin this with. Now, if I'm fighting a left-handed opponent, just switch it over. Once again, the weapon is on the side it needs to be able to block the majority of the offense that's going to be coming at me. Okay. When it comes to where on the weapon you're going to grip, well, that varies. It depends. For me, since I like to start my offense from a long-range position where I am at my optimum killing range and I'm out of the killing range of my opponent, I tend to want to start with the weapon as far out as possible, and therefore my grip as far back as possible. Hand nearly to the end of the haft. Since this has got a butt spike, I don't want to go all the way to the end because I'm blocking the ability to use that, and or I may accidentally punch my opponent with my gauntlet. So I'm going to have my hand up at least a little bit, about 4 or 5 inches from the end, so that I'm not blocking the use of my butt spike. My forward hand is about midway up the haft of my weapon. If I'm using a longer weapon, the trailing hand is what I'm gauging by, and my forward hand is wherever it's comfortable. Okay. I know that there are some other folks that will also talk about balance point, finding that balance point on your weapon, and that's where your leading hand would be. And I agree with that, depending on the range that I am fighting at. If I am going to be fighting close and tight to my opponent, yes, I will essentially choke up on my weapon. I don't need all that extra range, and since I've got a limited striking area, I need this to be able to come into play. And if I'm in really tight and I'm like this, what can I do with the head? Not much. For me to be able to attack, I've got to do something to get that head into play instead of being too far out. So yes, in this case, get my hand down closer to the head. Now the axe head is right at my opponent's head range. I can hit him with that. I can smack him here. So where I choke up to or where I start my placement depends on the range that I'm going to be fighting with my opponent at. So since I tend to start out here, I want to maintain as much range advantage as I possibly can. So, trailing hand back to just short of the end, forward hand up to wherever it's comfortable, which for me tends to be about halfway up the haft. Okay. When I'm using the cutting spear, it would be no different. Now, obviously, with the bastard sword or with a great sword, I already mentioned, we're talking about I got a limited grip area here. And your hand placement isn't going to change a whole lot. Some great weapons do have a position in front of your cross hilt where you can grab it. Some, if you're doing half sword work, you can be grabbing it out on the blade somewhere. But for me, I typically keep my hand behind the cross guard. Okay, so that's a bit different. So, guard position. Now this is where we have, for me, 4 locations. Location number 1 is what I call full advance. Full advance means the weapon is down and I'm relying more on my thrusting tip than I am the blade at this point. If I intend to do a lot of work with the point, I'm going to be down here in full advance. Switching to the cutting spear. When I'm using my cutting spear, a lot of the times I'm doing a lot more point work than I am cutting work. And so I'm almost always going to start off in the full advanced position. I want that point where it's going to be the most effective in maintaining my range and my offensive capability. From here, I have what I call the 3/4 advanced position, which is just slightly off of the full advance. Now, the reason I really like this position here is because I can still drop down into a face attack very easily. But from here, I can also throw a cutting attack without having to pull back or wind up. If I'm already down here in full advance, for me to be able to make a cutting attack, I've got to do something to get the blade in motion, right? I have to wind up a little bit, as it were. Now, there's other ways to do that. You can certainly use your back trailing hand to attack to get your cut, okay? But the point is, I'm still having to pull the point off of target to make an attack in some way, even if I'm doing a whip around with my rear hand, all right? But from the 3/4 position here, I can still throw any cutting attack I want to these sides, even sweep over, but I haven't given up my point attack. I'm still able to quickly drop into a thrusting attack. Right? Notice my forward hand isn't moving a whole lot to get that. It's all about that trailing hand and using my forward hand as a guide and pivot. So even though I'm here to get that, I'm not having to really change where this hand is. All right. So we've got full advance, we've got 3/4 advance, we have half advance. I'm not particularly a fan of the half advance position for the same reason that I am not a fan of the no advance position, whether it's all the way back here or whether it's high guard. I know that this next statement is probably going to annoy a number of people, but unless you've got training in Kendo, have been trained by someone in Kendo, or someone who's very experienced, the high guard is going to get you in more trouble than it's going to be useful, right? Because my rule number 1 when it comes to great weapons is do not surrender your point, or do not surrender your range. I bring this up a lot in my lesson about maintaining your range advantage. But if you're up here, again, remember, we're talking sometimes a 1/4 of a second can be the difference between winning or losing. For me to get from here down to an attack, that's a lot of distance to cover. right? Someone who's got the right training, knows what they're doing from up here, that's not a problem. But the reality is, for me, in nearly 40 years of fighting, I only know 2 people that if they go into high guard, I back out of range. One of them was Duke Paul Bellatrix. The other is Duke Eichbrand. Anybody else goes into high guard, if they're starting in high guard, I just stay back out of range until they bring it down. If we're already fighting and they go into high guard, as soon as I see them start to pull back up into that high guard, I just get in as fast as I can. Because to me, it gives away just a little too much. But that's personal. And if you don't agree, remember what I said, no one true way. If it doesn't work for you, discard it. And that includes my advice. So, the positions I just mentioned are, recap, full advance, 3/4 advance, half advance, no advance, or high guard. So those are your basics. Stance, balance, guard positions, and I hope that that's useful to you as we move on. I've got 3 other videos out. Please take a look at those. Thank you very much.